The bride died at her own wedding breakfast. At precisely 11:30 on the morning of December 14th, 1896, Miss Elizabeth Carrington collapsed at the head table, her white wedding dress spreading around her like fallen snow. 23 guests watched in horror as she clutched her throat, gasped once, and fell silent forever. The bridegroom screamed her name. The vicar rushed forward. But within 3 minutes, Elizabeth Carrington, now Elizabeth Thornhill for barely 2 hours, was dead at age 24. I received Inspector Garrett's telegram that same afternoon at my Edinburgh boarding house. Bride murdered at wedding. Poison. 20 witnesses. All saw it happen. None saw who did it. Desperate. Please come. Thornhill Estate, Stirling. By evening, I arrived at the grand country house where what should have been the happiest day had become a nightmare.
Inspector Garrett met me in the library, his face grey with exhaustion. Inspector Garrett met me in the library, his face grey with exhaustion. Miss Blackwood, thank God you're here. I've never seen anything like this. A woman poisoned in front of 23 people, her new husband, her family, her friends, and no one saw how it was done. He led me to the dining room, where the wedding breakfast had taken place. The table was still set, food growing cold, champagne glasses abandoned. At the head, one place setting remained untouched, the bride's seat. "Walk me through exactly what happened," I said. Garrett consulted his notes. The wedding ceremony was at 9 o'clock this morning at St. Mary's Church in Stirling. Everything proceeded normally. Elizabeth Carrington married Robert Thornhill. 40 guests attended the church, but only 23 came back here for the breakfast, close family and friends only. They arrived at the house at 10:30. The breakfast was served at 11 o'clock, a formal 5-course meal. Elizabeth seemed happy, radiant even. She ate sparingly, nervous bride, everyone said. He pointed to the bride's place. At 11:28, we know the exact time because the mantel clock chimed the half-hour just as she stood. Elizabeth rose to make a toast. She lifted her champagne glass, said, "To my beloved husband and our future together," drank, and within seconds began convulsing. Dr. Palmer was among the guests. He's a physician, friend of the groom's family. He tried to help, but it was too late. She died at 11:31, 3 minutes from toast to death. I examined the champagne glass carefully, crystal, elegant, with the faintest residue of golden liquid. I sniffed it, the sharp scent of almonds. Cyanide, fast-acting, deadly, death within minutes. That's what Dr. Palmer confirmed, but here's the impossible part, Miss Blackwood. That champagne was poured from a bottle that was opened at the table in front of everyone. The footman poured champagne into all 23 glasses from the same bottle. Everyone drank from the same champagne. Only Elizabeth died. I looked at the other glasses, still on the table. Have these been tested? Dr. Palmer checked them all immediately. No poison in any of them except Elizabeth's. So the poison was added to her specific glass. When? That's what I can't determine. The glasses were set on the table before the guests arrived. The staff confirms this, but from 10:30 when guests entered until 11:28 when Elizabeth drank, that glass was in plain sight at the head of the table. 23 people were in this room. Someone poisoned that glass, and no one saw it happen. I studied the seating arrangement. The bridegroom sat at the centre of the long table, the groom to her right, her sister Charlotte to her left. Directly across from her was her father, James Carrington. The rest of the family and friends spread along both sides. I need to speak with everyone who was here, starting with the bridegroom. Act
Act 2. The Suspects. Robert Thornhill, age 28, the devastated bridegroom, handsome, wealthy, now broken. I found him in the drawing room, still in his wedding suit, staring at nothing. He said, "I loved her," his voice hollow. "We'd been engaged for 6 months. She was everything to me. Who would do this? Who would murder her on our wedding day?" "Mr. Thornhill, I know this is difficult, but I must ask, did Elizabeth have any enemies?" "None. Everyone loved her. She was kind, generous, cheerful. This makes no sense." "What about you? Do you have enemies?" He looked up sharply. "You think this was meant for me?" "It's possible. Did anyone oppose your marriage?" A pause. "My cousin Harold thought I should marry someone of higher social standing. Elizabeth came from a good family, but not aristocratic. Harold made some comments, but nothing serious. He couldn't. Anyone else?" "No, my parents are dead. I have no siblings. Elizabeth was my whole world, and now she's gone." Charlotte Carrington, age 20, Elizabeth's younger sister, pretty, red-eyed from crying, but something else in her expression, something harder. She said, "Elizabeth always got everything," then caught herself. "I'm sorry, that sounds terrible. I loved my sister. But it's true. She was the beautiful one, the charming one. Father adored her, and she got Robert." "You cared for Robert Thornhill?" Charlotte's cheeks flushed. "Everyone cared for Robert. He's handsome, wealthy, kind, but he only had eyes for Elizabeth. He barely knew I existed." "Where were you when your sister drank the champagne?" "Sitting right next to her. I watched her stand, watched her toast, watched her drink, and I watched her die." Tears spilled over. "I should have stopped her, should have known something was wrong, but I didn't. I just sat there." "Did you see anyone approach her glass before she drank?" "No, the glasses were already filled. We'd all been sipping champagne during the meal, but Elizabeth waited to drink hers until she made the toast. She said she wanted to savor the moment." James Carrington, 56, Elizabeth's father, a prosperous merchant, stern, controlled despite his grief. "My daughter was my pride," he told me in his study. "Beautiful, accomplished, making an excellent marriage. Thornhill was a good match, wealthy family, good reputation." "Did you approve of the marriage?" "Of course, I encouraged it." "No reservations?" His jaw tightened. "Robert Thornhill is not titled, but his fortune is substantial, more than substantial. Elizabeth would have wanted for nothing." "Mr. Carrington, I must ask a delicate question. Does your daughter Charlotte resent Elizabeth?" "Charlotte is young and foolish. She had some silly infatuation with Thornhill, but that's all it was. She would never harm her sister." "Are you certain?" "Absolutely. Charlotte was sitting beside Elizabeth when she died. If she'd poisoned the glass, she'd have had to do it in front of the entire table. Impossible." Dr. Thomas Palmer, age 42, the groom's friend and the physician who tried to save Elizabeth. "I've never felt so helpless," he said in the morning room. "I'm a doctor. I should have saved her, but cyanide works so quickly. By the time I reached her, it was already too late." "Could it have been self-administered? Suicide? On her wedding day? Impossible. Elizabeth was radiant this morning, glowing with happiness. This was murder, Miss Blackwood." "Who had access to cyanide?" "It's not difficult to obtain. Used in photography, metal cleaning, various industries. Any moderately resourceful person could acquire it." Harold Thornhill, aged 32, Robert's cousin and closest living relative, aristocratic, arrogant, barely concealing his disdain. "Robert married beneath himself," he said bluntly in the billiard room. "The Carringtons are merchants. Trade, Miss Blackwood. No title, no lineage. Robert is the last of the Thornhills. He should have married into aristocracy." "Did you tell him this?" "Many times. He wouldn't listen, infatuated with that girl's pretty face." "You didn't attend the wedding ceremony, I'm told." "I attended the breakfast out of family obligation, but no, I didn't go to the church. I won't watch a Thornhill debase himself." "Yet you came to the house afterward. Why?" "To support Robert, misguided though he is, and," he paused, "to ensure the marriage settlement was properly executed. Robert is wealthy but naive about business matters." "Where were you when Elizabeth died?" "Sitting halfway down the table, watching the pathetic spectacle of her toast. When she collapsed, I thought perhaps she'd fainted from the excitement. Then I realized it was far worse." Mrs. Anne Carrington, age 52, Elizabeth's mother, devastated, barely coherent with grief. "My baby, my beautiful girl. She was so happy this morning. She told me this was the best day of her life." I waited patiently until she could speak more clearly. "Mrs. Carrington, did Elizabeth have any worries, any concerns about the marriage?" "None. She loved Robert completely. They were perfect together." "What about Charlotte? How did she feel about the marriage?" Mrs. Carrington's expression shifted, became guarded. "Charlotte is young. She'll find her own happiness in time." "That's not what I asked." A long silence. "Charlotte had feelings for Robert. I knew it. James knew it. But it was childish infatuation, nothing more. She would never," her voice broke, "she would never hurt Elizabeth. Never." Act 3. The Investigation. I spent the afternoon reconstructing the timeline with an obsessive precision. The wedding breakfast began at 11 o'clock. The footman, a young man named Peters, confirmed he'd poured champagne for all 23 guests from the same bottle, a bottle of Moet and Chandon, opened at the table in front of everyone. "I poured the bride's glass first," Peters explained nervously. "Then the groom's, then worked my way around the table. All from the same bottle, I swear it, Miss Blackwood." "And before you poured, the glasses were empty?" "Yes, ma'am, set on the table that morning, completely clean and empty." I examined the seating chart Inspector Garrett had created based on witness statements. Elizabeth sat at the center, Robert to her right, Charlotte to her left. Directly across, James Carrington. The table was narrow enough that anyone sitting across could have reached Elizabeth's glass, but not without being seen. Unless... I returned to the dining room and stood at Elizabeth's place. From here, I could see the entire table. 23 seats, all with clear sightlines to the head position. If someone had tampered with the glass after it was poured, multiple people would have witnessed it. But what if the poison wasn't added after the champagne was poured? I examined Elizabeth's champagne glass again under better light. The crystal was spotless, except for the champagne residue. But when I tilted it, I noticed something curious, a faint, oily shimmer on the inside of the rim, almost invisible. I called for Inspector Garrett. "Inspector, look at this. The poison wasn't in the champagne itself, it was on the rim of the glass." Inspector Garrett peered closely. "You mean someone coated the rim with cyanide solution before the champagne was poured? When Elizabeth drank, the poison on the rim mixed with the champagne in her mouth. The champagne itself was harmless. That's why no one else was poisoned. But when could someone have done that? The glasses were set on the table before the guests arrived. Exactly, which means the poison was applied either before the guests entered at 10:30 or during the breakfast itself while everyone was distracted. I questioned the household staff extensively. The dining room had been prepared that morning starting at 8 o'clock. The table was set, glasses placed, everything ready by 9:30, while the family was at the church. Who had access to this room between 9:30 and 10:30? I asked the butler, Mr. Graves. Only the staff, Miss Blackwood. We were making final preparations. All the staff can account for each other? Yes, we were working together constantly. What about the family? Did anyone return to the house before 10:30?
Graves hesitated. Miss Charlotte returned briefly. She said she'd forgotten her gloves. That was around 10 o'clock. She was in the house perhaps 5 minutes. My heart quickened. Was she alone? I believe so. She went upstairs to her room, then left again immediately. Did she enter the dining room? I don't know. I was in the kitchen. I found Charlotte in her bedroom, still wearing her bridesmaid's dress. Miss Carrington, you returned to the house at 10 o'clock this morning. Why? She paled. I told you, I forgot my gloves. The butler says you went to your room, yet you were wearing gloves at the breakfast. I've seen the photographs. I found them. They were in my reticule all along. So you returned to the house for no reason. I was nervous, flustered. I made a mistake. Did you enter the dining room while you were here? No, I went straight to my room and back out. I didn't go near the dining room. But her hands were shaking.
Act 4. The Revelation. That evening I requested Inspector Garrett gather everyone in the drawing room at 8 o'clock. As the clock struck 8, all the key individuals assembled. Robert Thornhill, still devastated, Charlotte Carrington, pale and trembling, James and Anne Carrington, aged by grief, Dr. Palmer, sombre, Harold Thornhill, impatient. "Thank you all for coming," I began. "I know this has been a horrific day, but justice for Elizabeth requires the truth." I stood before them, feeling the weight of what I had to reveal. Elizabeth was poisoned with cyanide applied to the rim of her champagne glass. The poison was placed there before the champagne was poured, which means it happened either before 10:30 when guests arrived or during the breakfast itself. Inspector Garrett and I have spent the day investigating both possibilities, and I've discovered something troubling. I looked at Charlotte. "Miss Carrington, you returned to this house at 10 o'clock this morning, claiming you'd forgotten your gloves. But you hadn't. They were with you all along. Why did you really come back?" Charlotte's voice was barely a whisper. "I told you, I was confused. You came back to poison your sister's champagne glass."
Gasps filled the room. Mrs. Carrington cried out. "No!" Charlotte stood, her face stricken. "That's not true! I didn't! I couldn't!" "You had motive. You were in love with Robert Thornhill. You resented Elizabeth for winning him. And you had opportunity, 5 minutes alone in the house, access to the dining room, knowledge of which glass would be Elizabeth's." "Miss Blackwood," Robert said hoarsely, "surely Charlotte wouldn't—" "I wouldn't." Charlotte's voice rose to a scream.
Yes, I loved you, Robert. Yes, I was jealous of Elizabeth. But I didn't kill her. I swear on my soul I didn't kill her. Tears streamed down her face. I came back to the house because I was crying. I didn't want anyone to see me cry at the church, so I came home to compose myself. That's all. I never went near the dining room. I went to my room, fixed my face, and returned. I loved my sister, even though I envied her. I would never hurt her. I watched her carefully. Her grief seemed genuine, raw. You're telling the truth, I said quietly. Charlotte collapsed into a chair, sobbing. Then who? Robert demanded. Who murdered my wife? I turned to face the others. The answer requires us to ask a different question. Who benefited from Elizabeth's death?
Act 5. The Accusation. Robert Thornhill married Elizabeth this morning, but marriage creates legal obligations. A husband's property becomes shared with his wife. His wealth becomes hers too. I looked at Harold Thornhill. Mr. Thornhill, you mentioned ensuring the marriage settlement was properly executed. What did you mean? Harold's expression remained cold. Standard legal matters, nothing unusual. I spoke with Robert's solicitor this afternoon. There was something unusual. Robert signed a marriage settlement giving Elizabeth half his fortune immediately upon marriage, not the standard arrangement where the wife receives money only upon her husband's death. Half his fortune transferred to her name this very morning. Robert nodded. I wanted Elizabeth to know I trusted her completely. The settlement was my idea. Which means, I continued, that as of 9 o'clock this morning, Elizabeth Thornhill owned half of one of Scotland's largest fortunes, and when she died at 11:30, that fortune didn't remain with her family. It reverted to her husband, her widower, Robert Thornhill. The room went utterly silent. Mr. Thornhill, you loved your wife, I believe that, but I also know that 3 months ago you made a catastrophic business investment. You lost nearly half your fortune in a failed railway speculation. Robert's face drained of colour. Your cousin Harold knew about this loss. He's been managing your business affairs. He knew you were facing potential ruin, unable to maintain your estate, your position in society. The Thornhill name would be disgraced. But if you married Elizabeth Carrington, whose father is a wealthy merchant, you'd gain not only her dowry, but also business connections that could save you. Her father could help you recover your losses. The problem was the marriage settlement you'd already signed. You'd promised Elizabeth half your remaining fortune. If the marriage proceeded, you'd be left with almost nothing. You'd be dependent on your father-in-law's charity. Unless Elizabeth died before the marriage settlement could be fully executed. No, Robert whispered. No, I loved her. I believe you did, but you loved your fortune and your name more. You knew that if Elizabeth died immediately after the wedding, but before the marriage settlement was finalized, the property transfer would be invalid. You'd inherit her dowry while keeping your own fortune intact. Dr. Palmer leaned forward. But Robert was sitting right next to Elizabeth. How could he poison her glass without being seen? Because he poisoned it beforehand, this morning, before the breakfast, when Charlotte was here crying in her room. The staff was busy in the kitchen. You entered the dining room. You knew which seat would be Elizabeth's, and you coated the rim of her glass with cyanide dissolved in a thin oil to make it invisible. It took 30 seconds. No one saw you. Then you sat beside your bride through breakfast, chatted and smiled, knowing that when she made her toast, and she would make a toast, brides always do, the poison would kill her. The champagne poured from a bottle opened at the table would seem innocent. Everyone would drink from the same bottle and survive. The mystery of how only Elizabeth's glass was poisoned would baffle investigators, and you'd be the grief-stricken widower, inheriting both your wife's dowry and keeping your own fortune. Within a few years, you could remarry, and no one would think badly of you.
Robert's hands were shaking. This is insane. I would never. Harold Thornhill, I said suddenly, turning to the cousin. You helped plan this, didn't you? Harold's aristocratic composure cracked. I have no idea what you're talking about. You knew about Robert's financial troubles, you knew about the marriage settlement, and you knew that if Robert married Elizabeth as planned, the Thornhill fortune would be halved unless she died quickly. You obtained the cyanide. You have connections in industrial chemistry through your club. You gave it to Robert and helped him plan the murder. You suggested the glass rim method. You thought you'd both gotten away with it. Inspector Garrett stood. Mr. Thornhill, Mr. Harold Thornhill, is this true? Robert's voice was barely audible. How did you know? Your shoes, I said. When you entered the dining room this morning to poison the glass, you stepped on the Persian rug near the door. That rug was cleaned yesterday. The staff confirmed it. But this morning at 10:15, there was fresh mud on it, December mud, from the garden path outside. The household staff entered through the servants' entrance. Their shoes were clean. Charlotte came from upstairs. No mud. But you, Robert, came from outside, walking through the garden to enter through the French doors. Your shoes left mud traces that shouldn't have been there. And when I examined your shoes this afternoon while you were changing clothes, I found more than mud. I found traces of the same oil used to dissolve the cyanide on the glass rim. You'd spilled a drop on your shoe and hadn't noticed.
Robert buried his face in his hands. Harold Thornhill stood abruptly. This is circumstantial. Is it? I reached into my pocket and withdrew a small glass vial. Inspector Garrett found this in your room, Mr. Harold Thornhill, hidden in your shaving kit. It contains cyanide dissolved in mineral oil, exactly what was used to poison Elizabeth. Harold's face turned grey. You murdered her, Charlotte whispered, staring at Robert. You murdered my sister on your wedding day. For money. Robert's composure finally shattered. I didn't want to. I loved her, but I had no choice. The debts, the shame, I would have lost everything. Harold said it was the only way. He said no one would ever know. But I loved her, he sobbed. God help me, I truly loved her. As Inspector Garrett placed handcuffs on both men, James Carrington's voice cut through the room like ice. You will hang for this.
Epilogue. The next morning, I stood at Stirling Station, waiting for the Edinburgh train. Charlotte Carrington approached, dressed in black, her face pale but composed. Thank you, Miss Blackwood,
for finding the truth. I'm sorry it was such a painful truth. Better painful truth than comfortable lies." She paused. "I hated Elizabeth sometimes, envied her, but I never wanted her dead, and to know that the man she loved, the man she trusted completely, killed her for money." Her voice broke. "Your parents?" I asked gently. "Destroyed. My mother won't leave her room. My father sits in his study staring at nothing. They put so much hope in Elizabeth's marriage, and it ended in murder. And you?" Charlotte looked at me with eyes far older than her 20 years. "I'll survive. I have to. Someone needs to remember Elizabeth as she really was, not as a victim, but as a person, happy, kind, trusting. She deserved so much better than Robert Thornhill." As the train pulled away, I watched the Scottish countryside roll past.
A bride murdered at her own wedding breakfast, a husband who loved his fortune more than his wife, a cousin who enabled murder to preserve family wealth. The champagne glass with its poisoned rim sat in evidence now, a crystal testament to greed and betrayal. Inspector Garrett's final telegram had been brief. "Both men have confessed. Trial set for February. Justice for Elizabeth." I returned to my boarding house, to my Latin students and their conjugations, to the ordinary rhythm of Edinburgh life. But I would never forget the image of Elizabeth Thornhill, radiant in her white dress, making a toast to her future, a future her husband had already poisoned. Some betrayals, I reflected, are worse than any poison. The end.